How much acreage do you really need? There has been an increase in people wanting to do small-scale farming and homesteading, but some people are still scared to leave suburban living for country dwelling. But for those of you that are ready to take that plunge, what questions should you be asking yourself? Well, I'm going to tell you, as somebody who left suburban living and took the plunge, what questions I asked myself and how we got to this point. For those of you that are new to our channel, welcome. My name is Sid and I am one of 3 Mississippi. My husband and my daughter and I had a small farm, 0.64 acres out in Southern California. But the downside of that was, number 1, it was in California. And number 2, there was no way we could expand it to what we wanted, because we were really locked in to that size property and priced out of everything else in that state. So we made the leap from that 0.64 acres to the 45 acres down in Mississippi that we now live on. We've been here for less than 2 years and we have done a lot so far, but let me tell you, there is still a lot to do. We already had several years of homestead farming under our belts when we made the move, and we're already pretty knowledgeable about a lot of different things that we wanted to do, things that we didn't want to do, and now we're just working on scaling it for the land that we have. Who doesn't like the idea of a more slow-paced, quiet life where you're able to provide food and security for yourself and your family and maybe even your neighbors? Several years ago, my family and I made the decision to try to become more sustainable, to raise a lot of our own meat as much as we could, to have eggs available to us, to learn how to process and preserve our own food. My husband is an avid gardener, so he took over that section of it while I threw myself into the animals. Now on 0.64 acres, there's not a lot of room, but we had it laid out in such a way that we made it as productive as we could. We were able to, on a small section of our neighbor's pasture poultry, some meat chickens, some Cornish cross, that we were then able to raise and sell some and keep some for ourselves for the year. We also did turkeys, quail, ducks. We would raise a couple of pigs a year and process those out, as well as some lambs. This provided us with an abundance of meat and eggs, and between what we sold that helped recoup some of our costs and pay back into the farm, and what we were able to provide for ourselves, we didn't have to buy a lot of things at the grocery store. In fact, until we had moved here, I hadn't bought meat at the grocery store in years. So one of the first things you have to ask yourself when it comes to making this move is the size of the property you'll need to do what you want to do. Do you just want to grow a few crops? Do you just want to have a garden? Is that all that you want to do? Or do you just want to have a garden and some chickens? Or do you want to mainly raise cattle? Or do you want to, you've got to figure that out, because each of those things requires a different amount of space. And with that comes the idea of how are you going to rotate them out? If you decide you find a property that you like that has a homestead on it already built, maybe you find a piece of property that's completely raw, doesn't have power or water yet, but you've got an RV and you're willing to rough it while you build it yourself, that is totally an option. We did not go that route. We bought a property that had an established house on it, mainly because we did kick around the idea of building, mainly because my husband's day job, he needed to have internet and a home office right away once we moved. So looking at the properties that are available, you need to decide, number 1, does it have a dwelling, or do I need to build or make a dwelling? And if that dwelling is already existing, how much work needs to go into it to really make it habitable? And are you willing to put in that elbow grease? Farmers and homesteaders often enjoy doing things hands-on. We like building things ourselves. We like processing our own animals and processing our own food. So the idea that those things are things that you don't like, then homesteading and small-scale farming is not going to be for you, because there will always be something that needs built, repaired, processed, and it's a lot of hard work, but the rewards are amazing. I think personally, for the average homesteader or small-scale farmer, I think around the 5-acre mark is good for most people. That way it's not overwhelming. You can easily have a couple of grazing animals, whether it be goats or sheep or a couple of cattle, And you could then easily also have some chickens or some poultry and fowl that you like on that space and not have it feel overwhelmed, all while leaving yourself enough room to create the size garden that you want. Is it possible to do it on an even smaller scale than that? Well, yes. We did it on less than an acre for a long time. But ideally, if you want to have a little bit more room and have that little bit of feeling of freedom attached to your homestead and your small scale farm, I think 5 acres is a good number for a lot of people. I don't have any scientific evidence to back that up, by the way. This is just my own personal opinion, having gone through this. Now, we did make the leap from less than an acre to 45 acres. And that's a big leap. As you can see, there is a lot of land behind me. Most of which we haven't done much with yet. But again, we have been here less than 2 years and we have focused our attention on building things like the chicken coop and some of the animal enclosures, as well as building the garden and maintaining some of the pastures. The quality of the land was not in the best shape when we got here. Every year the hay had been cut and removed from the property, kind of depleting the nutrients that were in the soil. It wasn't being fed back into the soil. So what we've done is we have cut the hay and let it lay a couple times now. Some sections we have burned, but the quality of the earth is coming back. It's coming alive again, and it's doing so much better in just that short period of time. And it's also been able to allow us to pick sections like what you see behind me to allow for nature's habitat, for things like quail and wild turkey and deer to bed down in. Now, keeping in mind when you're looking at properties, you know, is there water source on the property? Does it have a pond, a lake, a river, a creek? Something that runs through it? Is it flat? Is it very hilly? Are there a lot of rocks? These are all going to be things that are going to come into play when you're either building or making animal structures or creating your garden. The other aspect of size to consider is there are times of year when you have more animals than others. I'll explain. If you decide, for example, that you want to do meat chickens during that season, that's usually, you would start them in January or February, depending on exactly where you are in the planet. Then you would want to make sure that they're processed out and done with for the season before it starts to get too hot. They do not do well in extreme heat, so I always try to have all mine done before the end of June. But that means that for a few months I'm not only brooding several batches of chicks, but then I'm rotating them out into the pasture and then processing them as they are getting to the correct size. So for a while, I may have a few hundred chickens around, and that's a lot. So that's something to consider when you're looking at the scope and the size of your land and the times of year that you're going to want to be doing more things. Springtime is when the babies come anyway, so if you're breeding ducks or if you're breeding chickens or you're doing goats or sheep, all of those animals are going to be kidding and lambing and hatching all in the spring for the most part. You will get some that will do it in the fall. You will get some that will maybe start in the late part of winter. But that is when you're going to start really seeing your influx of new life around the farm. And if you're not ready for everybody to have babies at the same time, you really have to think about separating certain animals or holding off on breeding some, or maybe not having a male altogether, just so that you can make sure you don't get overwhelmed and outgrow your little homestead or your small scale farm before you're ready. Chicken math is real, guys. It's no joke. And it's not just because of springtime when they're breeding and a couple get broody and all of a sudden you look out and you've got 47 new little chicks running around your yard. But you might get a couple and then you decide, oh, I want to get this breed too. And then, you know, then you're at Tractor Supply one day and you see another one that you really like, and then before you know it, you've got Silkies and Polish and Rhode Island Reds and Wyandottes and Well Summers, and you have every kind of chicken that you can imagine, and you've built a coop that can only hold 10 birds. And all of a sudden, you have 37,000 birds. So, chicken math is real. Don't build for the flock that you have. Build for the flock you think you're going to have. This applies to all animals on the farm, but chickens get the brunt of it because chickens are really easy to accommodate. So I've seen people do this with goats. I've seen people do it with just about every animal that you could have on a farm. They don't consider what they're really going to want to have on their farm, or some maybe accidents that might happen on the farm that create new life. And they don't build the things for that size, because that chicken math is no joke, and it applies to every single living creature on the farm, 100%. And you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have too many mouths to feed and not enough land or space to feed them. We are very blessed. We have wonderful pastures now, and we're able to pasture our birds, and so we don't have to give them as much feed and basically money out of our pocket as we would if we were back at that 0.64 acres trying to keep them fed. That would all be coming out of my pocket, because there wouldn't be land like this for them to eat. So you've got your acreage, you've got your animals, you've got a good thing going. Well, now it's time to actually harvest some of those things that you've been growing for the last year. Some of your meat chickens, some of your quail maybe, some of your rabbits, some of your goats, some of your sheep, whatever it is that you have decided to hone in on and focus on, there is a time where you have to process them out. The question you have to ask yourself before you even get that far is, are you comfortable doing that, or is someone in your household comfortable with processing an animal? For some people, this is a hard no. It's not something they're comfortable with. They don't want to learn how to do it. They're squeamish. They feel that it's just not something that they're capable of doing, and they don't want to learn. And that's okay. I can respect that. It is not for everybody. However, it is something that you need to consider, because even at the bare minimum, when you have animals, you will have animals that are injured beyond medical intervention. You will have animals that are sick beyond medical intervention. And the last thing that you want as their caretaker is to let them suffer or languish in pain because you couldn't bring yourself to take care of it. There are times where you have to cull an animal. And to me, if you are not able to do that, you have no business having animals on your property. That is my hard stance on that. You can agree to disagree with me, but I 100% have had times where I have walked out and had an animal that was in pain, that was beyond the point of saving, and the most humane thing to do was to end its suffering. That happens. And when you have a farm, it is your duty as their steward, as their shepherd, to not let them be in pain and not let them suffer. So if it's not something that you think that you're capable of, you're done. You're good. Grow an eggplant. That's all you can do. Like don't get any chickens, don't get anything. That's the end of the story for you. You have to figure out how you're going to get your meat to your table. Otherwise, you just have a lot of pets. So learning the proper ways to process your different types of animals, how to store that meat in different ways, whether for you that means canning, maybe it means dehydrating. Those are all wonderful options. For us, for the most part, we do freeze a lot of our meat. We also, because we like to be prepared, always keep a lot of propane and empty jars around. So if we were to have a prolonged power outage, we would be able to then quickly get that meat into jars, out of the freezer and onto the shelves. We can a lot of our meats. We also make a lot of our own broths after we process out some chickens, for example. We may then take the remaining carcasses and make broth and then can that, and it sits on our shelf. These are all things that anyone can learn to do, but don't wait until you have a bunch of acreage and a ton of animals to take care of to start thinking about the other items that you'll need to be able to complete those tasks. You want to remember that these are skills that you need to learn and use before you put yourself in a situation where you could end up wasting a lot of good materials because you're feeling overwhelmed, because you didn't know how many items you needed. You didn't know you needed a pressure canner to can your chicken broth. You didn't know that you needed to get shrink wrap bags if you wanted to freeze your chickens whole. You know, there's things like that that you have to research a little bit and be aware of. These are all things that are skills that can be 100% learned, but they are skills that need to be 100% practiced. You can watch 1,000 videos on a topic, but until you do it hands-on, it's not the same. So get your hands a little bit dirty, go learn how to do some of these things so that when you do get your perfect small scale farm or homesteading property, that you don't feel overwhelmed and you do feel like you are up to the challenge of being able to preserve your own food and not waste anything and be able to be self-sustainable. There are so many things to consider when you're thinking about making the switch from city or suburban living to living a little further out and having some actual land that you can have animals and raise vegetables and things on. There's costs associated with it. There's things that you won't realize that you may need until you get there. These are all questions that you need to be thinking about for yourself. How far away is the nearest big city? Where is the closest hospital? You know, these are all things that when you're looking at it, it's going to help you determine the schools in your area, or if you're going to homeschool, is there a good homeschool network in that area that you're looking at? Is the crime rate in the nearest big city something that you can live with when you need to go there to, you know, go to a doctor or go to a large big box store that maybe you want to hit every couple of months? These are definitely things to consider, to look at, to think about the inconveniences that you are now signing yourself up for. Is it worth it to you? You will not have a Starbucks down the street. You may have a Dollar General within a 10-mile radius of you if you're in the South, but is it a good Dollar General? Or is it one of those Dollar Generals that just has like stuff on clearance? Like, you know, you gotta know your area. You know, for us, we're about 30 minutes from kind of I would say a medium-sized city, and it's got a big Walmart, like the kind of Walmart that's got the big grocery store inside, which is nice. But then we're about almost an hour away from Starkville and from Tupelo respectively. So that's where a lot of your doctors and hospitals and things like that are going to be. So generally once a month, there is a trip that I will make into Starkville or into Tupelo for certain things that I can't get at the big Walmart or that I can't get at our local grocery store or hardware store. So these are things to just consider when you're thinking about making this switch. It's not for everybody living out in the boonies. I love it. I love that I can sit out here in the pasture and I can listen to the bugs and I can listen to the birds and I can watch the seasons change. And it takes me about 15 minutes to get into our little town of like 3,700 people. But if I want to go somewhere else, it's going to take me about 35 minutes to an hour, depending on what I need to go do anywhere else. To me, that's an acceptable trade-off. I don't like the city. I don't want to go there frequently. In fact, I try to lump my trips together as much as I can so that I don't have to spend as much time in the city. Again, that's not for everybody. You're not going to have a movie theater down the street. You're not going to have some of those simple conveniences that we take for granted sometimes in modern society. You really do have to think about if that's for you. If it's for you getting up early and taking care of animals, if it's for you staying up late and taking care of animals because somebody's sick or somebody's birthing, or, you know, these are all things that you have to ask yourself. Now, whether you want to do this on a smaller scale or a larger scale for your acreage, it's all about planning it, being smart, rotating things around on your property. There's a lot of information about rotational grazing or mob grazing, as it's sometimes called, and rotating, you know, crops and things like that. There's tons of information out there on different ways to do that and how to really utilize your land the best and make it as healthy as you can. That's not what this video is. This video is telling you, do that research now before you sign the deed. Because you want to know what you're signing up for. You want to know if the space that you have is going to match all the pictures in your head, because it's a big commitment. It's a commitment to the land, it's a commitment to the animals that you then take on, and it's a commitment to your family. It's important to remember that your chances are, if you're doing this, you have a family, and not a lot of single people that do this. There are some. I have a few friends that are single people that do this. But the typical thing is that families are wanting to really focus on families and being able to do this kind of stuff together. And I 100% recommend it. But don't go in with your eyes glazed over and not fully aware of what you're signing up for. It is hard work. It's long hours. It's uncomfortable sometimes. And it's beautiful all the time, even at its worst. But make sure you do that research, that you look at the things that you're wanting to do and see if that perfect little farmhouse that you found that sits on 10 acres is enough room to have the 100 head of cattle that you're dreaming of. I always recommend people that are embarking on this way of life that they start small. Start with something small. Start with a small animal that isn't too cute, that's not going to be hard for you to process. I usually recommend quail because they turn around quickly. You get eggs and meat, and they're very easy to raise in a small contained space. It's honestly something that you could start doing in your little suburban home now, on your back porch or in your garage, and you can see then if you are capable of processing it out. Or find a buddy that you know likes to go hunting and go on a hunting trip with them and see if it's for you. See if it's something you can handle. Don't go into it naive, guys. Don't go into it blind, and think about the daily things that you will then have to do and what your day is going to look like so that you are aware of what you're signing up for. I want you guys to join this journey. I want you guys to learn these skills 110%. It's one of the reasons that we do YouTube, is to share all of this stuff with you guys. But what I hate to see is people bite off more than they can chew. They start with these really grand, huge ideas, and they can't manage the animals they have. They realize at the last minute that they cannot process animals on their own, and that it's really expensive to hire a butcher to do it, or they can't find one in their area, and it turns into a whole thing. Know what your limits are. Know what your partner's strengths and weaknesses are in that area too. I can't grow anything to save my life, but my husband has a green thumb. He has no patience for the animals, but I would sleep out there next to them if it meant that they would be okay. So know what your partner's strengths and weaknesses are, what you guys can do together. He's better at building the stuff. I'm better at maintaining the stuff. So that's what we do. We split our duties. No one person in the household should have all of the responsibility. So knowing that going into it too is really important. You have to make sure that everybody on the team is on board, because this is a all hands on deck situation. 100%. God only made so much land. He's not going to make any more. So get your little piece of it and make your own small scale farm, your own homestead. Fill it with the beautiful creatures and animals and plants that you want to see thrive, that you want to be able to sustain your family with, and really think about what things will fit your team that you're going into this with, because not every animal, not every kind of plant is for everybody. And so thinking about your climate, your landscape, and all of those things for your land is going to play a huge role in what you'll be able to raise and how you'll be able to raise it. I hope that you're excited about your homesteading and small scale farming journey. I hope that you go into it with your eyes wide open, that you ask all the questions, not only of yourself, but of your family, to see if this is really the right fit for you. Feel free to drop any questions in the comments, and I will be happy to answer to the best of my ability. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Marvel in God's country and how beautiful it is, and what a gift and a blessing it is to be able to be a good steward of it all. So with that, guys, I appreciate you, and I hope that you stay blessed. And remember, safety's off. Happy farming!